Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at seduction.
Ooh.
And specifically, we're going to be taking a look at Robert Greene's book, The Art of Seduction.
Ooh, a classic.
Yeah, and I think, anybody who is interested in how people work or how they can maybe get people to do what they want should take a look at this book.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a fascinating look at this whole idea of how do you influence people? How do you draw them in? And it goes beyond just the romantic realm, too. Greene looks at history and he picks out all these figures from Cleopatra to Casanova to even John F. Kennedy to show that these principles, they pop up everywhere.
I love that he uses JFK as an example.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right?
Yeah.
You start to see the world differently after you read this book.
Yeah.
It's like you've got this secret decoder ring. You can see these patterns of seduction playing out everywhere in politics, advertising, even just like everyday conversations.
It makes you realize that maybe we're all being seduced all the time in a lot of ways.
And maybe we're all seducing other people without even realizing it.
Yeah. And I love how he just starts off the book by saying seduction. It all starts with character.
It does, yeah. He actually identifies 9 different types of seducers,
Okay.
each with their own like unique allure and approach. So you've got like the Siren, the Cleopatra,
Yeah.
they're captivating with her voice and presence. And then you've got the rake, like Casanova, known for that like insatiable charm charisma.
Right. So if you're a siren, you really rely on like your physical presence or your voice to draw people in.
Yeah, there's like this magnetic quality about them, right?
Yeah. And then it's more about like the wit and the charisma and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the rake is all about charm and playfulness and
Right.
kind of keeping people off balance.
Right.
A little bit dangerous sometimes, too.
Yeah. And what about somebody like Marilyn Monroe? How would you categorize her?
Oh, Marilyn. She's a fascinating one. I'd say she was a modern-day siren. That blend of like innocence and sex appeal, it's intoxicating. It's like she understood the power of persona like no one else.
Yeah, she really cultivated that.
She did.
And it really worked for her.
It did. And that kind of brings us to another big point, that Greene makes the power of illusion.
Okay.
He argues that we are all drawn to people who offer us an escape from the ordinary, right? Like a chance to indulge in our fantasies. And these seducers, these masters of seduction, they create this aura around themselves that promises to fulfill our deepest desires, even if it's just for a little while.
Right. It's almost like they're creating a movie
Yeah,
that you can step into.
exactly. A carefully crafted world designed to captivate and enthrall. I mean, he gives that amazing example of Madame de Pompadour, King Louis the Pict's mistress.
Right. And she really knew how to keep him on the hook.
Oh, she was a master at it.
Right.
It wasn't just her beauty. It was how she constantly appealed to his desire for novelty. She's always changing things up, the decor, the costumes, even the activities they did together. So Louis the XV never got bored.
That's really smart.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like she understood the psychology of desire and how to keep the flame burning bright.
So it's almost like creating a constantly evolving experience.
Exactly. Keeping things fresh and exciting. It makes you wonder how we can apply this principle in our own lives, right?
Yeah, definitely. Even small changes, I think, can make a difference in keeping things interesting. But Greene doesn't just focus on the positive aspects of seduction. He also delves into some of the more controversial tactics, like the idea of mixing pleasure with pain.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
Right, because it sounds a little bit manipulative.
It can be if it's not done right.
Yeah.
Greene suggests that by creating a bit of tension, like a sense of guilt or longing, followed by relief or satisfaction, you can actually deepen the emotional connection.
Right.
And make the target even more susceptible to your influence.
It's kind of like a push and pull dynamic.
Right, exactly. You're creating this emotional roller coaster, and it leaves the other person wanting more.
That sense. Greene uses the example of Tullia d'Aragona, a Renaissance courtesan.
Oh yeah, Tullia. She was a brilliant strategist.
Yeah, what does she do?
Well, she cultivated this image of intellectual and poetic refinement. It was like she elevated the whole act of seduction to this almost spiritual level.
Right, so it wasn't just about physical attraction. It was about engaging the mind and the soul as well.
Exactly. She added layers to the experience. She played with emotions and appealed to more than just basic desires.
That's pretty clever. It seems like details are really important in this game of seduction.
They are. Greene talks about how it's often the subtle touches, the seemingly insignificant gestures that have the biggest impact.
So it's not just the grand gestures, it's the little things that really count.
Exactly. He brings up Pamela Churchill Harriman as an example.
Yeah.
She was known for her meticulous attention to detail when it came to her lovers. She anticipated their every need and desire.
Okay.
It was like she created this immersive experience that left them feeling completely pampered and captivated.
So she built this perfect little world for them, shielded them from the harsh realities of everyday life.
Precisely. And it's fascinating how this same technique can be applied beyond just romantic pursuits. Think about how companies use similar strategies to build brand loyalty and keep customers coming back for more.
Right. It's about understanding what your target truly desires and finding creative ways to fulfill those needs.
Exactly. Whether it's a sense of belonging exclusivity or simply a moment of pure pleasure.
Now on to another intriguing aspect of seduction, the allure of the forbidden.
Oh, yes. The danger zone.
Right. Greene suggests that transgression, pushing boundaries, and tapping into people's desire to explore their dark side can be incredibly seductive.
He uses Lord Byron as the classic example, right?
Yeah.
All those rumors of his scandalous behavior, the whispers of affairs, even incest, it just seemed to amplify his appeal.
So it's like the bad boy archetype, but on steroids.
Exactly. It's about creating an aura of danger and excitement of breaking free from social constraints.
And I think we see this play out in other areas of life too, not just romance, like advertising campaigns that use suggestive imagery or controversial themes to get people talking.
Absolutely. It's about tapping into that human desire for something beyond the ordinary, even if it means venturing into the taboo. The key, of course, is to understand how to use this power ethically and responsibly.
Right, because there's a fine line there
There is.
between being intriguing and being exploitative.
Definitely. So it's important to be mindful of that.
Yeah. Now, Greene also points out that these techniques, these seduction techniques, aren't just limited to romantic conquests.
Right.
They're used in politics, in marketing, in all sorts of areas where persuasion and influence are key.
And this raises a really important question. Are we being seduced all the time without even realizing it?
Right. Like, think about the way politicians craft their image.
Yes.
Or how advertising plays on our emotions and desires.
Exactly. It's like Greene has given us this secret decoder ring to understand the world around us. Suddenly we see these patterns everywhere.
Yeah, and it's a little bit unsettling when you start to realize how much of our decision-making is influenced by these forces.
It is, but it's also empowering, right? Because once
Yeah.
you understand these tactics, you can make more informed choices.
Yeah.
You can resist being swayed by subtle manipulation.
Right. So it seems like Greene's book isn't just a guide to seduction. It's a guide to understanding the very fabric of human interaction.
It is. It's about understanding power, influence, persuasion. All these dynamics that are always at play, whether we're conscious of them or not.
Okay, so we've talked about the different types of seducers, the power of illusion and the allure of the forbidden. But how does Greene suggest applying these principles beyond romantic pursuits? I mean, most of us aren't trying to become the next Casanova.
Right. Well, he gives this great example of Andrew Jackson, a U.S. president who mastered what Greene calls the soft sell.
Okay.
So instead of like bombarding voters with policies and facts and figures,
Right.
Jackson focused on creating a captivating persona. He presented himself as a man of the people, emphasized his character, his values, his vision, to connect with voters on an emotional level.
So it sounds like a precursor to modern political campaigning where image and persona often overshadow concrete plans.
You could say that. And it's not just limited to politics. Edward Bernays, a public relations pioneer, he applied similar principles to advertising. He understood that people resist overt sales pitches.
Right.
So he created events that felt like news to subtly shape public perception.
That's fascinating. Can you give us an example?
One of Bernays' most famous campaigns was all about making smoking acceptable for women,
Okay.
which was taboo back then.
Right.
So during the 1929 Easter Parade in New York City, he arranged for a group of stylish young women to publicly light up cigarettes.
Oh, wow.
And he framed it as a statement for women's rights.
So he made smoking seem like a feminist act.
Exactly.
That's incredibly clever and a little bit sneaky.
It was. And the media, none the wiser, presented it as news, not advertising,
Right.
which gave it a sense of authenticity and helped shift public perception.
It's amazing how a well-crafted event can have such a ripple effect.
It is. That's the power of understanding how to shape narratives and perceptions.
Yeah.
But of course, as Greene emphasizes, we have to consider the ethical implications of these tactics.
Right, because there's a fine line between persuasion and manipulation.
There is.
And I think that's something we need to be really mindful of, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with messages from all sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's more important than ever to be critical thinkers and to question the motives behind the messages we're receiving.
Now, speaking of ethical considerations, Greene doesn't shy away from addressing the potential pitfalls of seduction. He even dedicates a whole section to the art of post-seduction.
Right.
How to gracefully end things without creating a messy situation.
The delicate art of the fade out.
Exactly. We've all faced this challenge at some point in our lives, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a business deal, or even just a friendship. How do you gracefully exit a situation without creating resentment or drama?
Well, Greene argues that one key is to fight against inertia. To avoid letting things settle into a predictable routine,
Okay.
you have to maintain a certain level of intrigue and keep the other person engaged.
So even after you've, quote unquote, won someone over, the work isn't done. You have to keep things interesting, maintain that spark.
Exactly. And one way to do this is by creating a sense of uncertainty,
Okay.
of unpredictability. Don't be afraid to mix things up, to introduce a little tension, even a touch of what Greene calls strategic absence.
So it's about keeping the other person on their toes, never quite knowing what to expect next.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, but it can be incredibly effective in maintaining that seductive hold.
Right. It reminds me of that mixing pleasure with pain idea we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Greene uses the example of Ninon de l'Enclos, a renowned French courtesan.
Okay. Tell me about her. What were her secrets?
Well, Ninon was known for her beauty and wit,
Okay.
but also for her independent spirit. She refused to be controlled by any man. She never let them get too comfortable or take her for granted.
So she had that classic coquette energy playing with that push and pull dynamic?
Precisely.
Yeah.
She understood that giving in too easily becoming predictable would diminish her allure. It's about maintaining a sense of mystery, keeping the other person guessing.
It seems like she was a master strategist, carefully orchestrating the entire dynamic.
She was. And that's a key insight from Greene's work. Seduction is often a process, not a one-time event.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding the psychology of the other person, knowing when to advance and when to retreat.
And when it's time to end the seduction, Greene stresses the importance of doing so gracefully. He gives the example of Duke Ellington, who, as we discussed earlier, managed to maintain relationships with multiple women without causing any major fallout.
Right. Ellington understood that even in ending a relationship, you could still create a positive experience.
How did he do that?
He used thoughtful gestures, gifts, even song lyrics to soften the blow and maintain a connection.
So it's about respecting the other person's feelings even when you're moving on.
Exactly. It's about ending things on a good note and not burning bridges.
And this applies to all sorts of relationships, right?
It does. Romantic, professional, personal. The art of disenchantment is about preserving those connections even when the dynamic changes.
That's a great point. We often focus so much on the initial stages of attraction, on winning someone over, but the way we end things is just as important both for ourselves and for the other person.
It speaks to our character and our ability to navigate relationships with sensitivity and grace.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's touch on one of the more intriguing aspects of seduction, the use of what Greene calls spiritual lures.
Ah, yes. Appealing to the higher self, the intellect and the spirit.
It seems almost counterintuitive. We often think of seduction as being primarily about physical attraction, about appealing to the senses.
Right. But Greene argues that there's a deeper level to seduction. Connecting with someone on a soul level, making them feel seen and understood on a deeper level.
That's interesting. How does a spiritual lure work in practice? Can you give me an example?
Think of Johannes Brahms, the famed composer.
Okay.
He was deeply in love with Clara Schumann, the wife of his mentor, Robert Schumann.
Oh, so a classic story of unrequited love.
It is. And Brahms, knowing that a physical relationship with Clara was impossible, focused on connecting with her intellectually and spiritually.
Okay. So how did he do that?
They spent hours discussing philosophy and art, but Brahms was also a master of indirect seduction. He wrote Clara letters filled with poetic language and veiled longing. He composed music inspired by her expressing emotions that he couldn't put into words.
Wow, that's incredibly romantic.
It is.
It seems that sometimes the most potent seductions are the ones that never fully culminate in the physical.
Exactly. It's about that lingering tension, the unspoken desires that fuel the imagination. And that's the beauty of spiritual lures. They create a sense of longing and yearning that can be incredibly powerful.
It reminds us that seduction isn't just about fleeting pleasures. It can be about forging profound and lasting connections, even if those connections remain unconsummated.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that there are many different ways to captivate someone to leave a lasting impression on their heart and mind.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this section, exploring the darker side of seduction, the art of disenchantment, and the power of spiritual lures.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
And what's striking is that all of these principles, while often discussed in the context of romantic relationships, have applications that extend far beyond the realm of love.
They do.
Yeah.
We see these tactics used in politics, in advertising, in everyday interactions.
It makes you realize that we're all players in this game of seduction, whether we're conscious of it or not.
Right. And understanding the rules of the game can give us a real advantage.
Exactly. So pay attention, folks. There's a lot more to seduction than meets the eye.
Definitely. You know, it's really remarkable how these principles of seduction that we often associate with romance,
Right?
they can be found in all sorts of unexpected places.
Like where?
Well, let's take Napoleon, for example.
Okay.
Greene argues that he was a master of what he calls creating a spectacle.
Oh, Napoleon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can already picture it. The dramatic entrances, the grand gestures.
Exactly. He definitely knew how to command attention.
He did.
And Greene suggests that Napoleon used these spectacles not just for military effect, but to captivate the French people, to win their hearts and minds.
So it was a form of seduction.
It was, on a grand scale.
Wow. So how did he create these spectacles? What were his strategies?
Well, think about his return from exile on Elba.
Okay.
He escapes, lands on French soil with just a small group of followers, and starts marching towards Paris.
Bold move.
It was. And every step of that journey was carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. He rallied the peasantry, invoked powerful symbols of the revolution, even dared his former soldiers to fire on him.
That's crazy. It's like something straight out of a movie.
It is. It's a carefully crafted narrative designed to evoke strong emotions and create this sense of destiny.
And it worked.
It did. The French people were completely captivated. They were yearning for a leader who could offer excitement, a break from the ordinary. And Napoleon, he provided that and more.
It makes you wonder how much of our own decision-making is influenced by these carefully crafted narratives.
Right, whether we're aware of them or not.
Exactly.
It really highlights the importance of being critical consumers of information and recognizing the subtle ways in which we're constantly being persuaded.
Yeah, that's a great point. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Greene's concept of disenchantment. The art of ending a seduction gracefully.
Ah, yes. The delicate art of the fade out.
Exactly. Because let's face it, we've all faced this challenge at some point, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a business deal, or even a friendship.
Right.
How do you gracefully exit a situation without creating resentment or drama?
Well, Greene argues that one key is to fight against inertia.
Right.
To avoid letting things settle into a predictable routine.
Okay.
You have to maintain a certain level of intrigue.
Right.
Keep the other person engaged.
So even after you've, quote unquote, won someone over, the work isn't done.
Right. You got to keep things interesting. Maintain that spark.
So how do you do that?
Well, one way is by creating a sense of uncertainty, of unpredictability. Don't be afraid to mix things up. Introduce a little tension, even a touch of what Greene calls strategic absence.
Oh, so it's like playing a little bit hard to get.
You could say that.
Yeah.
It's about keeping the other person on their toes, never quite knowing what to expect next.
And this reminds me of that mixing pleasure with pain idea we discussed earlier.
It's all connected.
It is.
Greene uses the example of Ninon de L'Enclos,
Okay.
a renowned French courtesan.
And what was her secret?
Well, she was known for her beauty and her wit,
Okay.
but also for her independent spirit. She refused to be controlled by any man.
That's pretty impressive for that time period.
It was. She never let them get too comfortable or take her for granted.
So she had that classic coquette energy.
She did. She understood that giving in too easily, becoming predictable, would diminish her allure.
Makes sense.
It's about maintaining a sense of mystery,
Yeah.
keeping the other person guessing.
It seems like she was a master strategist.
She was carefully orchestrating the entire dynamic.
Mm.
And that's a key insight from Greene's work. Seduction is often a process, not a one-time event.
Right.
It's about understanding the psychology of the other person, knowing when to advance and when to retreat.
And when it's time to end the seduction, Greene stresses the importance of doing so gracefully.
He does.
Like he uses the example of Duke Ellington,
Right.
who, as we discussed earlier, managed to maintain relationships with multiple women
Yeah.
without causing any major fallout.
It's amazing.
It is. How did he do that?
Well, Ellington understood that even in ending a relationship, you could still create a positive experience.
Okay.
He used thoughtful gestures, gifts,
Yeah.
even song lyrics
Wow.
to soften the blow and maintain a connection.
So it's about respecting the other person's feelings even when you're moving on.
Exactly. It's about ending things on a good note and not burning bridges.
And this principle applies to all sorts of relationships, right?
It does, romantic, professional.
Uh-huh.
The art of disenchantment is about preserving those connections even when the dynamic changes.
That's a really great point, because I think we often focus so much on the initial stages of attraction, on winning someone over.
Yeah.
But the way we end things is just as important, both for ourselves and for the other person.
It is. Speak to our character and our ability to navigate relationships with sensitivity and grace.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one of the more intriguing aspects of seduction, the use of what Greene calls spiritual lures.
Ah, yes. Appealing to the higher self,
Right.
the intellect and the spirit.
It seems almost counterintuitive because, we often think of seduction as being primarily about physical attraction, about appealing to the senses.
Right. But Greene argues that there's a deeper level to seduction. It's about connecting with someone on a soul level, making them feel seen and understood on a deeper level.
So it's not just about the physical.
It's not. It's about creating a genuine connection.
Okay, I'm curious. How does a spiritual lure work in practice? Can you give me an example?
Think of Johannes Brahms, the famous composer.
Oh, yeah.
He was deeply in love with Clara Schumann, the wife of his mentor, Robert Schumann.
Oh, so a classic story of unrequited love.
It is. And Brahms, knowing that a physical relationship with Clara was impossible, he focused on connecting with her intellectually and spiritually.
So how did he do that?
Well, they spent hours discussing philosophy and art.
Okay.
But Brahms was also a master of indirect seduction. He wrote Clara letters filled with poetic language and veiled longing, and he composed music inspired by her.
Wow.
Expressing emotions that he couldn't put into words.
That's incredibly romantic.
It is.
It seems that sometimes the most potent seductions are the ones that never fully culminate in the physical.
Exactly. It's about that lingering tension.
Right.
The unspoken desires that fuel the imagination.
It's about what could be.
It is. And that's the beauty of spiritual lures. They create a sense of longing and yearning that can be incredibly powerful.
It reminds us that seduction isn't just about fleeting pleasures.
Right.
It can be about forging profound and lasting connections,
It can.
even if those connections remain unconsummated.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that there are many different ways to captivate someone, to leave a lasting impression on their heart and mind.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this section. We explored the darker side of seduction,
Yeah.
the art of disenchantment, and the power of spiritual lures.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And what's striking is that all of these principles, while often discussed in the context of romantic relationships, have applications that extend far beyond the realm of love.
They do. We see these tactics used in politics, advertising, everyday interactions.
It makes you realize that we're all players in this game of seduction, whether we're conscious of it or not.
And understanding the rules of the game can give us a real advantage.
Exactly. So pay attention, folks. There's a lot more to seduction than meets the eye. Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of seduction. Now, in this final part, things are going to get a little bit more intense. We're going to be exploring some of the more controversial techniques that Greene outlines.
The dark arts of seduction.
Yeah, exactly. The ones that really make you question where that line is between persuasion and manipulation.
Right. It's important to remember that Greene presents these techniques as tools for understanding human behavior.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily endorsing them.
Right.
He's encouraging us to become aware of how they work, both for good and for bad.
It's like he's giving us a backstage pass to this world of influence and persuasion.
It is.
But with that knowledge comes responsibility.
Absolutely.
Right.
We have to use it wisely.
So one of the more provocative ideas that Greene explores is the allure of the forbidden.
Ooh, yes.
He argues that there's this undeniable appeal to breaking social norms,
Right.
to pushing the boundaries of what's considered acceptable.
Like that old saying, rules are made to be broken.
Right, exactly. And he uses figures like Lord Byron as examples.
Yeah.
Whose scandalous behavior, including rumors of incest, only seem to fuel his appeal.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's a really thought-provoking concept.
It is.
Because it makes you question, why are we drawn to the taboo?
Well, Greene suggests that it taps into our repressed desires, our longing for something beyond the ordinary, even if that something is a little bit dangerous or unconventional.
It's that bad boy trope, but taken to a whole new level.
It is. It's about creating this aura of danger and excitement breaking free from all those social constraints.
And what's so interesting is that we see this not just in romantic seduction, but in various aspects of our culture.
Oh, absolutely. Think about artists who push the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in their work, or marketing campaigns that use provocative imagery or controversial themes to get people talking.
It's like they're tapping into that same primal desire to
Yeah,
experience something outside the norm.
to challenge conventions
Yeah,
and see what happens.
exactly. But of course, there's a delicate balance to strike.
Right.
When does this allure of the forbidden cross the line into something harmful?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And it's a line that Greene acknowledges, but he doesn't necessarily define it for us.
Right.
It's up to each individual to discern where that boundary lies.
So it's not just about mastering the art of seduction. It's also about developing a strong moral compass
It is?
to guide our actions.
Absolutely.
It's about using these tools responsibly
Yes,
and be mindful of the potential consequences.
definitely.
Right.
Now, another technique that Greene explores that can be quite controversial is the use of what he calls forced intimacy. He suggests that by creating a sense of closeness and shared secrets, you can actually lower someone's defenses and make them more open to your influence.
That sounds a little bit manipulative.
It can be. There's definitely a risk of crossing the line here.
Okay.
But Greene argues that there are ways to create a sense of intimacy without resorting to manipulation.
Okay, so how do you do that? It's about finding genuine common ground, sharing meaningful experiences, and building trust gradually.
So it's not about forcing yourself on someone or pressuring them to reveal personal information.
No, it's not about that. It's about creating an environment where they feel safe and comfortable opening up naturally.
Okay.
He offers the example of Casanova, who was a master at this.
Right.
He would often travel with his targets, creating a sense of shared adventure and building rapport through storytelling and attentive listening.
So it's like he created these little intimate worlds separate from the pressures of everyday life where connections could form more easily.
Exactly.
But it's crucial that that intimacy be genuine.
It is.
Yeah,
If someone senses that they're being manipulated, the whole dynamic is going to backfire.
for sure.
Authenticity is key.
Right.
People can usually sense when someone is being disingenuous
Yeah.
or has ulterior motives.
Right.
That's why building real trust and connection is so important.
And it seems that in the end, it all comes back to character, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not just about mastering techniques. It's about cultivating the qualities that make you a genuinely attractive and engaging person.
That's a great point. And that's something that Greene emphasizes throughout the book. Seduction isn't just about tricks and manipulation. It's about developing an authentically appealing persona, one that draws people in naturally.
Well, we've explored a lot of fascinating and sometimes unsettling territory in this deep dive into the art of seduction.
Yeah.
We've delved into the darker side, examined the ethical considerations, and ultimately it seems we've come back to the importance of character and intention.
Right. Because in the end, seduction is about connection.
It is.
It's about understanding what makes people tick and finding ways to create genuine bonds.
And perhaps with this newfound awareness of the art of seduction, we can all navigate the complexities of human interaction with a bit more wisdom.
And a lot more discernment.
Exactly. So until next time, happy exploring.